the first Share It podcast, where we explore how other people shared their messages with the world. Today, for our first podcast, we're going to be talking about what our mission is, what I'll be talking about when I'm interviewing other people on this podcast, and why you, the listener, should decide to tune in. Today, I have a guest speaker, Mike Antos. He is an amazing communicator. He is experienced in different forms of communication, and he's also like my best friend and boyfriend. So I thought he would be the best person to bounce some ideas off of today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Mike.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Payton. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. A little bit about myself. Well, a lot of my first communication instances were just me enjoying, putting on silly plays and things like that for my family. I always enjoyed, at the time, being the center of attention, I guess. I guess that's a bad way of putting it. But I always enjoyed, expressing myself a little bit. And I certainly carried that into different activities that I was involved in. I was involved with a co-op program for my homeschool group that I did a speech class for. And that was actually probably where I was given the opportunity to do possibly my biggest speech, largest gathering speech engagement. I was involved with an evangelism school called the Ezekiel Project, where I learned how to preach. I learned how to preach to a congregation. I also learned how to preach in the open air in public. So I certainly gained a bit of experience there. But I was also involved in high school. During high school, I was involved with the Air Force Auxiliary Program, the Civil Air Patrol. And there was certainly a lot of leadership and communication experiences that I got to learn in that, in terms of the kind of the disciplinary side of communication. If communication, whether it's an art or it's a science or whatever, I learned a lot about the discipline side and the craft of communicating through that.
Awesome. So lots of different forms of communication and different experiences that you communicated in. Just a little bit about myself. I have a background in public speaking. I actually have 8 years of public speaking experience, during which I have traveled the United States, gone to nationals in speech and debate, and have spoken to audiences reaching hundreds of people. Large audiences, small audiences, speaking for all different kinds of events, be it theatrical, be it musical, be it actual presentations. I am passionate about helping other people share their messages, which is why I'm doing this podcast, because I want to learn how other people share their messages with the world. So the first question we have real quick is, what do you think is the most effective form of communication?
I think the most effective form of communication, if we're talking about the best way to effectively communicate your experience to someone and for them to most effectively receive it, I actually think it's to communicate with them one-on-one, as opposed to communicating to a group. The reason I think that is just because it's much more difficult to build rapport with an audience than it is to build rapport with one person. When I would share the gospel in the open air with people, we would have a sketchboard, that we would paint a gospel message on, and then speak the gospel as we were painting. And I found that, it's much easier to build rapport and communicate the gospel to your listener when it's somebody one-on-one. And that's a kind of a hot take with my group. My group kind of is pretty stuck to that paintboard idea, but I have been much more able to communicate with people one-on-one. Once I can tell them, it's so much easier to tell one person, I'm not just recruiting for my church. I'm here because I genuinely believe that if you don't place your faith and trust in Christ as your personal Savior, and believe that he came to earth as a man to die in your place to pay the penalty of death that you deserved to pay, and then he rose again, then if you don't believe on that, I believe that you're going to spend the rest of eternity in the lake of fire. And I don't want that to happen. I want you to be able to spend the rest of eternity with the Lord. And that's why I'm here, is because I care about you. I don't want you to be burning in hell forever. And once you tell them that, they may not just be like, oh, yes, I absolutely will. I will certainly put my faith and trust in Christ. But they listen. And that is effective communication. So that is my humble opinion. But yes, that's what I think the most effective form of communication is, one-on-one.
So you, just to sum it up a little bit, you like the aspect that you can actually relate to the person and explain so that they can see themselves in the situation, not just, broad, open-end message to everyone.
I just think, if I could sum it up, I just think it's, in my experience, it's a lot easier to build rapport with one person than it is like even 10 people, even sometimes 5 people. It's so much easier. And the reason why I think is just because there's so much less opportunity for the person that you're talking to put up barriers to not take in the information. Where if you have multiple people, you can be talking to the one person in a crowd and they just kind of tune themselves out. And then the second they turn their attention to you, oh, now you speak. Now you got their attention. It's so much easier to just communicate to one person because they have to listen to you the whole time.
That makes sense. I mean, that's why we build friendship one-on-one instead of like having someone stand in front of the room and introduce themselves. For myself, I personally think that the most effective form of communication is the one that you are most passionate about, as the communicator. If you don't like debate, you shouldn't debate. If you are an artist and you're passionate about art, you should find a way to communicate your message through art. Now, with that said, not every aspect of sharing your message is going to be exciting and passionate, but if you're not passionate about what you're sharing and how you're sharing it, then your audience isn't going to either, because who's going to take your message seriously if you're not? So that would be my answer, is there's so many different forms of communication. I really think it depends on what you're passionate about.
That was a good trick question.
The second question I have is, what are some messages that people want to share? Just like throw a handful out there.
Well, are we talking about like to inspire people, or are we talking about what are the most influential messages in the world?
Nope. Just what are some messages? You can use some examples that are your own or other examples. Just think of the first couple messages that come to your mind. What are things people are trying to share with others?
Well, I guess it depends on the speaker and the audience, and so it's an extremely subjective question. So it's a good question, but I think, if you want to, everyone wants to know the 3 questions of who am I, why am I here, and where am I going? And if we're talking about those questions in a very big picture scale, people want to know what their place is in the world, where they came from, as far as did they come from, did our race evolve from a rock or a period on a page, or were we intelligently designed? They want the answer to that. And then they want to know, okay, is there an afterlife? When we go into the ground, is it just black? Is there no thought? Is there no sight? Is there nothing? Are we done? Is there, is there a limbo? Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? Is there what? So I think if you want to talk about message, the messages, the messages that are most being spoken about, I think, are the ones, or at least maybe the ones that are being most listened to, are the ones trying to answer those questions or speak on those topics, especially during times like this. Not going to say it. I'm not going to bring it up anymore, but I'm just going to say times like this, yes.
We're so sick and tired of this quarantine. That's actually a really, really good thought, that the questions that people are most interested about are the ones that, pertain to life and even life after death. I would say my answer to that question would be that there are so many different kinds of messages, and that they are as unique as each and every person. For example, Mac computers, okay? Apple. The company Apple, their message is that anything that you can think of in your mind, you can create through their computers. Apple has computers just like any other computer program, but they stand out because they have this message of, we want you to test the limits. And that's what Steve Jobs did. He took ideas and he tested the limits. He pushed past those barriers, and he created something through his laptops, through his computers, that allowed him to do that. And that's the message that he gives to each and every one of his customers. Messages could involve something that you're passionate about, the environment, evangelizing, for your example. I think that this podcast is a form of communication. I believe that an artist on the stage, when she's performing, is sharing her message for that moment. I believe that an artist who is painting a picture is sharing their message for that moment. I believe that anything that you are passionate about can become a message, and that it actually should become a message, because each and every one of us have different passions and things that we have been given that are important to us, and it's our job to share that with the world. So my answer would be that it's as open-end as every single person in the world is. There's no such thing as a right message.
That's why I was so excited you decided to start a podcast, is because people are discovering that it's a very great medium for people to communicate their most honest opinion. And so, I think you're fantastic at that. I would like to think that I'm pretty decent at that. So I was very excited when you said you were interested in starting this. It's gonna go great.
Well, thank you. I hope it does. And yes, you're at least fairly decent at communicating. Last speed question is, what are some ways that people share their messages?
Well, the big one I think nowadays is social media. And social media is also a form of communication. And it's where I think podcasting has, it's become a form of communication where people get to share their most honest opinion. But there's a stigma around podcasting where they share their most honest opinion respectfully. And that's why it's become so popular. But social media is the same thing, avenue to share your most honest opinion, but generally not respectful. Generally, because you're not actually talking to the person, you're generally, I think I said generally about 4 or 5 times now. That's a bad communication habit. But social media adds a barrier that allows you to just say whatever you want and feel that there's no consequence. And as unfortunate as such a kind of awful thing can be, it's a great tool, but as awful as it can be used, I think it's easily the most used, the current most influential form of communication.
I would agree. Yes, definitely. One thing about social media, though, is, you can have an Instagram account and not be popular. I am not popular on Instagram. You could have social media but not be getting your message out. And so I think my answer would be that the best form of sharing your message with the world is through creativity. I believe that you have to have something that's engaging, something that's exciting, something you're passionate about. And all of that comes into a mix with creativity. A great example, and I should have looked up the company because I don't want to misquote them, but there's a company that makes t-shirts and products and stuff like that, and they put designs on it, and they're an evangelizing company. One of my favorite products of theirs is the message bear fruit. And instead of, saying the words bear fruit, they have a bear holding a pineapple. And so they're sharing their message, but they're doing it in a creative way that engages people and makes them think and makes them laugh and makes them actually want to be involved. I would much rather want to wear a t-shirt that had a bear holding a pineapple than a shirt that said bear fruit, So I think it's all about creativity. I think that you have to be passionate about it, and you have to let that passion fuel your creativity, because you're going to have to try a lot of different things before you find something that works. But if you're passionate about your message and you actually want to share it, then you're going to find that way to share it in a way that others listen.
I have been wanting to buy one of those shirts for months. I haven't bit the bullet yet, but I love that company so much. It's a very good example.
I want to get one of their stickers and put it on my laptop, because I have lots of stickers on my laptop. Okay, so with those 3 questions, and I'm just going to do a quick run view of what questions we answered. First, what do you think is the most effective form of communication? Second, what are messages that people are sharing? And third, how do people find ways to share their message with the world? We are going to jump into what this podcast is doing and how this podcast is answering those questions. Okay, so at this point, we're going to kind of switch roles, and Mike is going to ask me a few questions about this podcast and what the reasoning behind why I'm doing it. So go ahead.
Yeah, you're not the only one who gets to interrogate during the podcast.
I couldn't take all the fun.
So, as someone who is a guest on this podcast, what I want to know from you is what the podcast is about. When people come to listen to the podcast, what can they expect to learn?
My mission with this podcast is to explore how other people share their messages with the world. I want to interview people from all walks of communication, be it public speakers, pastors, artists, painters, writers, theatrical lifestyles, any form of communication. I want to explore that, and I want to explore why they chose to express their message through that form of communication and how they came to that, because I want to inspire other people to do the same. I want my listeners to walk away from this podcast being inspired by how other people shared their message, so that they go out and they know that they can do the same.
Awesome. So your listeners, people who you're speaking to through this podcast, when you say your listeners, who would you say that the podcast is for? Who are you trying to reach with this podcast?
Anyone who has a message but is unsure as to how they want to share that message. Because I believe everyone has something that they're passionate about and something that they have been given worth giving to the world. But I think very few of us know how to, and even know that we can. So my podcast is for anyone who wants to share their message with the world.
Yeah, that's a good point, because everyone who is a communicator has a very unique style of communicating. And just like people who are unique with unique communicating styles, segue, what makes this podcast unique? What sets it apart from other popular podcasts, other kinds of podcasts that speak on maybe a similar topic? What makes it unique?
I think that there's two things that make my podcast different than any other one. And the first one is that we explore all forms of communication. I'm not just talking to people who are public speakers. I'm not just talking to people who are experienced in the form of verbal communication. I want to explore how people communicate in all forms of communication. And I think that's opens up the door to so many different opportunities. Number two, I want my audience to walk away inspired to do the exact same thing. I don't want to just say, hey, this is a great person who did this great thing. I want to say, this is a person who had a message just like you and found a way to share that message just like you can.
It's a great message. So we're not just a simple opinion or share experiences podcast. This is with the goal of instruction and aiding you, if you're a listener, aiding you in your endeavors to be a better communicator. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I want my listeners to be people who take action, not just someone who's entertained for 35 minutes.
Hopefully 35 minutes.
Lots of
Couldn't have said
editing.
it better myself.
Well, good. I'm happy you approve. So to wrap all of this up, I have one last question for Mike. And that is, what would you say are the top 3 tips that you would give to someone who wants to share their message?
Well, let's see. Number 1, easily the first one that comes to my head is communicate more. Be willing to open up a little bit more. It's to be an engaging communicator. You can't. I mean, it's not that we have a bias against antisocial people, but if you want to be a good communicator, I really suggest that you be willing to come out of your shell a little bit. Be more willing to share your respectful opinions with people. Be more willing to start up random conversations with your coworkers, with your friends, and just be willing to share your opinion. There's nothing wrong with sharing your opinion. Sometimes it's dicey, but it's a learn. If you think you can communicate it respectfully, communicate it. If you don't think you can communicate it respectfully, listen to what your mom said. Don't say anything if you don't have anything nice to say. That's my number 1. Number 2, I would say learn to care about people. Because I guess it kind of plays in the antisocial thing. If you're an antisocial listener, we're here for you. We're not trying to single you out. We're trying to, what I think is help bring you out of your shell. We're not trying to tell you you're, but I would suggest if you don't really find you care about people, you're not going to have any good, no one's going to want to listen to you if you communicate in any form, because you're going to be very visibly, unfortunately, it's human nature to ask, why should I care about someone if they don't care about me? And to be a good communicator, you do just kind of have to learn how to care about people who are not yourself. Because in the end, you're going to the way I see every speaking engagement, every opportunity that I speak to somebody, I see it as a teaching opportunity, and I see every listening opportunity as a learning opportunity. So you have to be willing to care about that person you have to care about that person enough to teach them, and you have to care about them enough to listen to them. That's my number 2. My number 3, because this was brilliantly sprung upon me. Can't say I planned beforehand. My number 3 tip.
But you did ask me not to tell you the questions beforehand.
That is true. And I think that's the more interesting way of doing it. So
you definitely like a challenge.
Yes. I think my 3rd tip would be to, my third tip would be to question yourself constantly what your opinion is about anything. Reason why I would say that, sometimes opinionated people can be very frustrating to deal with because they're usually very set in their opinion. It's true. But something that's very useful about forming an opinion over anything is you'll be able to share it. And generally, a lot of the things that you're communicating to other people are your opinion. Sometimes it's a debate where you're debating over evidence or facts. Sometimes sometimes it's over an objective conversation, but sometimes it's all about communicating your opinion. It's about communicating it. It's about having a well-rounded opinion, not just I think Jimbo is dumb. It's perhaps I don't think Jimbo is an effective leader. It's all about having an effective.
And no offense to any Jimbos that are listening.
Hey Jimbo, I just want to say, man, I think you're an effective leader out there. I just figured I'd throw that out. But having an opinion, I think that's a very important part of being a good communicator, is because if you don't know what you think about something, then you have not set yourself up for the first step of communication. You have nothing to communicate. So those are my three. Be willing to speak to people more often, care about those people in the first place, and have an opinion.
Those are great. Those are really, really great, especially for the fact that they were sprung on you on the spot. So congratulations. Awesome job. I would say my top 3 tips would be: 1, know what you're passionate about. I would actually sit down, take the time to write down things that you actually care about, because taking on somebody else's message, you can be interested in something, but it doesn't mean that you're passionate about it. I would take the time to actually know who you are, what you love, and why you love it. So first, know what your message is. And you'll probably have lots of different messages. There's lots of things that I want to communicate to people. There's not just one single message. But for myself, helping other people share their messages is what I am most passionate about. And it helps me because then I know where to go from there. Number 2, I would say look outside of the box. Don't just go with the first idea of this would be a great way to share things. Look for other avenues. Look for other ideas. Try to stand out. Don't be afraid of not fitting in, because that's the thing, is you want to stand out. You want your message to be separate from everything else. The last thing is, don't be afraid to try. You have got to fail before you can succeed. And you're probably going to have to fail multiple different times. But if you truly care about your message and you're truly passionate about it, then you'll keep trying and you will find a way that actually works. And in the end, not everybody's going to care about your message. But the creation of your masterpiece, of your performance, of your message should be more important to you than even who takes it. So my 3 are: know what your message is, know who you are. Number 2, look at creatively. Look at it from different viewpoints. And 3, don't be afraid to fail. Be excited about opportunities to try new things and fail at doing those things.
It's a great big picture perspective.
Well, this has been a blast. This has been a great first podcast, just bouncing some ideas off of each other and kind of clarifying exactly what this podcast is. Mike will be on the podcast multiple different times in the foreseen future. You guys have any questions that we can answer, just send them to me. in the link, or email me at paytongracewalter@gmail.com. And if we get enough questions together, I will invite Mike back onto this podcast and we'll answer those questions, because we want you guys to be involved. You guys are what make this podcast work. And we are doing this for you because we want you to share your messages with the world.
Absolutely.
All right. Signing off.
Signing off.
Their ideas. Nope. Totally messed that up. Okay.
Do as many takes as you need.
That's why we get to edit.
To put it simply, my opinion, I think it's one-on-one communication. That's my opinion.
Okay. Can I say something without offending you?
Yes.
That answer took 10 minutes.
Darn.
I'm really sorry, but I can't have that long of an answer. I love it, but like, can you say, get a little shorter?
Yes. I think my... Dang it. Okay. This is the section that we're gonna edit out. This is the section that's gonna get cut out. This is the section that no one will watch.
I started putting that in the blurbs.
Yes. So, because you're the queen of the cast.
Thank you.
That's gotta stick. That's gotta stick. Queen
Queen of
of
the cast. I don't think so. You can call me the queen of the cast. I'm not going to introduce myself as that.
Greetings, queen of the cast.
No.
I'll knight you on this side. I don't know what side you're on, but I'll knight you, queen of the cast.
Well, you're the only one I want to have call me queen of the cast. I don't want to be anyone else's queen. So,
Touche.